open up our meeting. This is the Provo Board of Adjustment meeting on October 21st, 2021. We are acting virtually according to our virtual protocols, and we have a hub location at City Hall, which looks like Rob is holding down very well. We're one item on the agenda, the amended agenda then tonight, and I will go ahead and read that in. Mark Hyde is appealing the Planning Commission decision of September 8th, 2021 to deny a variance request to subsection 15.07.010 Provo City Code to impact 30% slope to facilitate a 3-lot residential subdivision located at 3605 North Foothill Drive in the R1.10 zone, Sherwood Hills neighborhood. I think does anyone have any conflicts or concerns to declare before we have our staff report? I have none.
No conflicts.
No conflicts.
Perfect. So we'll proceed as follows. I believe Robert Mills is providing our staff report today. Once he's finished, we will have Board of Adjustment opportunity to ask questions of staff, at which point we'll open it up to the applicant, to Mr. Hyde to make any comments which he would like. We'll move to public hearing and then to deliberation by the board, and we'll get a decision. So with that, Robert, we will turn the meeting to you.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody. And I'll just mention as well that Richard Peterson let me know that he actually has a conflict of interest in this case, so that's why he has recused himself, and Tom Halliday, our other member, had an emergency at work, so that's why he's not here. So let me go ahead and start. For those of you, I hope you've had a chance to look at the staff report for this. There's one correction that I want to make. The one that went out said that the current legal use of this property is a warehouse building. That was my bad. That is not correct. It should just say vacant land. So just keep that in mind. This is a very wordy slide, but let me just go ahead and give a little bit of background on this particular project and what the request is here tonight. So on September 8th, 2021, the Planning Commission did consider a variance request from the applicant. For those of you who have had an opportunity, Chapter 1507 of the Provo City Code enables the Provo Planning Commission, which is a little different, it enables the Planning Commission to grant a variance to the critical hillside overlay zone. The critical hillside overlay zone was adopted last year, and the purpose of that is to provide additional design standards and regulations for those properties that have been deemed sensitive. It doesn't take away any property right, it just explains how it should be developed to mitigate any impacts to surrounding communities and to the visual view plane of the area. So one of the requirements is that slopes greater than 30% cannot be disturbed. However, Chapter 1507 again allows the Planning Commission to grant a variance for that in special cases. The applicant requested that a variance be granted to allow development of 3 dwelling sites on the subject property. And I'll, in just a second, give you a little bit more locational information on that. Provo City Engineering reviewed the proposal and had some concerns with the proposed access being on Foothill Drive. at 3605 Foothill Drive. Planning staff reviewed the application and proposal and had made a recommendation that the variance be granted with the following conditions. Only one dwelling site be established on the subject property, and that access would move from Foothill Drive, which is extremely steep, to 3700 North Little Rock Drive. That's the Villages of Quail Valley, which is a private road, and the anticipation was that the applicant would continue to work with that particular HOA if they were granted so to get that access. After holding a public hearing and discussion, the Planning Commission actually voted to deny that variance request. And in just a second, I'll give you all of the justification that they gave in in denying that variance request. And so the applicant has appealed that decision. And so what the Board of Adjustment is going to be doing tonight, your purview in this is just to determine whether the Planning Commission erred in their decision, and did they provide sufficient findings to support that decision. So let me give you a little bit of locational background on this. This is outlined in red is the subject site. It is located in between Foothill Drive, which is over here, if you can see my mouse, on the east side. Access to the property currently is shown on the subdivision map here along Foothill Drive. And then this is Little Rock Lane, Little Rock Drive. Yes. Okay, Little Rock Drive, which is a performance development community. And then there's not a specific access along this road, but the property does come up not quite to the road. And so this is where staff's recommended access was to be had. These are some photographs of the subject property on the Foothill Drive side. This is looking north. This is where the existing, where the property fronts that street. This is what it looks down. You can see there's a little bit of frontage here, and then it obviously falls off pretty rapidly. This is on the Little Rock Drive side. This is a private road. This is common area to the development. And then you can see in this picture up here, there's a fence down here, and that's where the property abuts. This is an image, same property outlined in red here, but provides topography just to help you understand that this is a site that is actually pretty steep, and which is the justification for this property being in the critical hillside overlay zone. And the underlying zoning is residential. And so that's why the applicant was requesting to be able to use that development right. So the Planning Commission decision. Planning Commission discussed this request, and after hearing very good public testimony, debating everything, they felt that there were several issues surrounding this property possibly developing. And ultimately, a motion was made and unanimously approved to deny the requested variance based on these findings. The proposed variance is contrary to the public interest as described in the purposes and objective of the critical hillside overlay zone. Granting the variance has the potential to create a substantial injustice for uphill properties. A hardship exists, but it is not unreasonable. And then it does impact a property right, but it is not unreasonable. And then again, the Planning Commission voted unanimously to support that decision. So the role of the Board of Adjustment in this comes into play to determine whether the Planning Commission erred in not granting that variance, and to allow exploration work and ultimately develop a 3-lot subdivision as requested by the applicant, or if one dwelling site, as recommended by staff, could have been a plausible alternative. Or the other consideration is whether the Board of Adjustment feels that the decision was correct and to uphold that.
So just a quick question, Robert. Are we superseding their decision if we reverse or we don't agree with this planning commission, or does it go back to the planning commission after us?
No, your decision will be the decision. And whatever your decision is can be appealed to 4th District Court.
Yeah, after that, right. But I'm just, okay, that makes sense. I'm just clarifying, because when it says we're deciding whether they erred or not is a little bit different than saying, forget about the planning commission, we're just deciding whether this variance should be granted or not. And my second question is, why didn't it just come to us first rather than planning commission first?
So let me explain that part. Generally, variances come to the Board of Adjustment. You guys are familiar with that. Up here, you can see on the screen that in Chapter 1507, the same justification of hardship requirements are made, but the body that you make an application to, in this case, is the Planning Commission, and that is written specifically into our code. And then that gives the opportunity for an appeal to the Board of Adjustment. So again,
okay, that makes sense.
That makes sense. Okay. So like you all are very familiar with, granting a variance requires the same justification of hardship. These are those specific justifications that the Planning Commission would then weigh, and also you, whether there is an unreasonable hardship, whether there are special circumstances that don't generally apply, whether the granting of this variance is essential to the enjoyment of a substantial property right, if the variance will not substantially affect the general plan and will not be contrary to the public interest, and that the spirit of the title is observed and substantial justice is done. So in your purview, you have the opportunity to reverse or affirm, wholly, partly. You can modify the decision. If the decision is to reverse, you need to have 3 members of the board necessary, and in this case, it has to be unanimous because there are only 3 of you here tonight. Thought I had one more slide, but basically the options for the Board of Adjustment tonight are 3 things. You can uphold the decision of the Planning Commission. You can reverse their decision and grant the applicant's original request to have 3 dwelling sites with access along Foothill, or you can reverse the decision of the Planning Commission and grant staff's recommendation that 1 dwelling site be allowed on the subject property, with the provision that access has to come from Little Rock Drive. So hopefully that makes sense, and we can get into additional questions or anything like that, but I'm going to stop there for now and ask if you have any questions of me.
One other thing. So you said we have 3 choices basically. One is to agree with the Planning Commission. One is to reverse the Planning Commission, or one is To agree with the staff's report.
So the first one is to uphold the decision of the Planning Commission. That's right. The second one is you reverse the decision and you grant the applicant's original request. The third one is you reverse the decision and you grant staff's recommendation. So
Okay.
number one is you're agreeing with Planning Commission. 2 and 3, you disagree with Planning Commission. It's just you're granting different things in the variance request. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So 2 things. I think one, and
That makes sense.
that these turn into like this.
Um,
These are orders coming in. These are customers coming in. Exactly.
I mean,
Where do we get?
the project, my other question is just looking at the map, there's no building on this map. There's no house attached to the property. It's just a piece of land in the hills.
That's correct.
Okay.
Second,
And there's no access to it besides what access, I mean, you showed us those pictures, but is the access, will there need to be some, will there need to be, or, oh man, I'm blanking on the word, but basically,
my earlier point is that
what's that?
An easement or
An
something like
easement, there we go. Will there need to be some easement, requests to make this possible, or is that even relevant? I'm looking at it, looks like it's in the middle of everything, so will there need to be an easement to even make this feasible? And I guess that doesn't matter, maybe on our case, but it just seems like it is kind of pertinent.
I think that's an important question. So currently, the only frontage that the property has right now is along Foothill Drive. See how this kind of juts in a little bit here. That's the property line. And so there is some access that directly.
But who owns that little access point?
It's part of the dedication, the original plat, with the original plat. And I have Bill Pepperoni and David Day here with me to answer these specific questions.
Okay.
Let them take it away for access on Little Rock Drive.
So the access that you see that Robert has just referred to is the most convenient access to the property in terms of just road access and availability, but that's the steepest part of the entire property. That's why staff has some hesitation or discomfort with that access point. Over on the other side of the property along Little Rock, it's significantly less steep.
Still steep, but just less.
And just to answer my question, will there need to be an easement then, or to get that? It's like, what I'm seeing in the red, it doesn't even have access to get there on any place, really.
Yes, that would need at least an easement, and Mr. Hyde, I'm sure, can address that issue. But yes, that would need at least an easement. Correct.
Robert, I have a question.
Sure.
On page 11 of the staff report, the first couple of paragraphs of the staff analysis, it says that this property is in a fault buffer study. And it said the applicant submitted statements suggesting an intent to perform work to understand the geological condition of the property. So in order for that work to be done, there needs to be access to the property. And in other words, there needs to be a road or something cut into the property for public works, or perhaps another company to come in and conduct their study. Is that correct? Am I correct so far?
You're absolutely correct. That's the first step in trying to decide how buildable this property is to do a geotechnical study. That's a standard requirement by engineering up in these hillside areas. The problem is to even get equipment onto the property to do those studies, 30% slope has to be impacted. in order to get access into the property to do the study. That's kind of the bottom line behind all of this. That's kind of the point.
Okay. What I know part of the process of going through Public Works is the fire department and everybody looks at a project and has input. The emergency services, what is their recommendation, or maybe that's not the right word, but what is their viewpoint on having roads that are at 30% or greater? Properties.
You can't have a road at 30% or greater. There's limitations on driveways and roads in the city that are more like 12% or 15% for a driveway. 50% for driveway is the maximum. The fire department has lane width requirements, which I believe Mr. Hyde has taken into account. If you look at his 3-lot plan, it's at least 20 feet wide. If you look at his hammerhead turnaround, that appears to me to be about what the fire department would recommend or what would require. All of that will come later as we get further into an actual development review. But it appears that Mr. Hyde has taken many of those types of requirements into consideration already.
So, I mean, it seems like one of the big concerns is the 30%. As far as, you know, what engineering has said and what you guys have been talking about continually, could you give us a little bit of background on why, at like what point does it get dangerous? Like, I'm assuming Mr. Hyde wants to build these houses and sell them, and I don't know. You'll talk to it when it's your time. But, you know, you say we do build these and we say, yeah, this is all good and everything. We build them and it's on this really, intense 30% incline, all of that. And somebody is in danger because we've given this variance, right? And that's one of the things that kind of comes to mind a little bit. And maybe somebody can talk to why that limitation is there. Because really, Robert, that's the variance we're really granting if we say yes, right? That they can build on something that is deemed potentially unbuildable at the moment.
So at this point, you're granting a variance to let them impact that to do their study. And David Day is here. He's from Public Works in the engineering. I'm going to let him kind of talk about the whole 30% slopes and everything like that.
Yes, so there's actually two things in place to protect natural hillsides that are above 30%. And one is the 30% slope that we're talking about here. The other one is the critical hillside zone was targeted at that same area to preserve those hillsides that are over 30%. And so anytime you disturb a hillside like that, there are slope stability issues that you have to overcome. The piece that's along Foothill Drive on this particular site is well in excess of 30%. It's probably in the neighborhood of 50%. You could go up there and hike down there if you'd like. It's very steep. The home just to the east there that fronts on Foothill Drive a few years ago wanted to add on and did a geotech report, did some trenching and found some faults. And so they were unable to expand their home because of the proximity of the faults to their homes. So we know that we need to get in there if any homes are built and trench and locate faults. But like Robert said, getting in there with heavy equipment basically destroys the slope from day one doing the exploration. So if you cut the road in get the heavy equipment down in there to explore the geology and find any earthquake faults. You've damaged those slopes, and that's why we're here. That's why we went to the Planning Commission, is they're wanting to get down in there and trench for those faults, and staff can't authorize that, and nor in this situation would we want to, because of the steepness of that slope on the east side.
That's so. A follow-up question, if I can, just Robert, this is my, and bear with me, everyone. I just have to ask the question so we know exactly what we're voting on and granting or not granting. But it seems like if we granted the 3-house or the 3-unit subdivision or whatever, that doesn't mean that Mr. Hyde potentially can even build there because of the situation, right? And if it's unbuildable, then that's unbuildable. Right now, we're just granting the variance to say, hey, you can subdivide it. Is there any caveats or ifs in there? Like, you can subdivide it if this, or is it just like you can subdivide it regardless, and it is what it is, you know? And if you can't build on it, you still have 3 lots, and then maybe he tries and goes and sells each lot or something. I don't know, whatever it is, but just help us understand. We're granting the variance, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's possible to build. Or right there, we can still say there can be 3 parcels on this, but it doesn't mean it's buildable until there's a situation. Or even the one, if we go a staff report, we can say, okay, you can build one there if it's buildable, but is that any different than what he can do right now? Like, or is it just allowing him to go onto the land? Is that what we're granting, kind of? I'm trying to just get to the bottom because it seems like there's 2 different things that are happening here.
Well, let me take a crack, and then Robert can follow up. So the way I understand the 30% slope, if you see fit to waive that requirement, then you're giving him the right to go and dig into 30% slopes, and that those slopes are fair game at that point.
And only on his property.
Yes. If you look at the map, is that map being shared?
Yes.
Okay, the map that Robert Scott put up, can I borrow the mouse? Right in here behind these homes is, behind this home right here, is where they proposed to cut a road down in. Now, that slope is very steep. The question that's on the geotech's mind that we consulted with is the stability of that home if anything's cut into that slope. And they felt like it would not be something that could be done without jeopardizing the stability of the home up above. So that's the basis for our saying let's not touch any of that stuff on the east. There are places that could come in on the west if something could be worked out with the homeowners association and the property owners. I know that's a whole different struggle, but that east side is very steep and not something that we would recommend touching.
So I would just follow that up with granting a variance is going to allow the applicant to impact the 30% slopes on the property. And so at that point, they'll be able to go in and establish whatever. You have the opportunity at this point, if that's the way that you're going to go, you have the opportunity to determine the number of dwellings that could be established, potentially. But granting the 30% slope impact facilitates all of those next steps.
But Mr. Marriott also did raise an important point in that if access is granted and the geotechnical study is done, the fault studies could show us that it's difficult or impossible to even get 3 houses onto the property. It may be difficult to even locate one. We don't know that. That's the point of doing that study. So that was a legitimate point, Mr. Marriott, that the geotechnical study is going to have a big impact on how many homes may go on the property or where they could be located, depending on the outcome of this board.
That's right.
Maria, did you ask a question?
That helps. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yes. So, Robert, earlier you were saying that the critical hillside overlay zone helps to determine the type of design that can go in a particular area. But am I also hearing that it helps, does it or does it not help to protect critical land or unstable land from being developed? Or could you explain more in depth what the critical hillside overlay zone actually is, please?
Sure.
So the intent of the zone is to allow development, but to do it in a way that's where you're trying to be environmentally sensitive. In a situation like this, where that becomes difficult is the hillside overlay zone would require a home. If a home is going to be built, you have to have a fire break area around that home for purposes of wildfire. Okay. The problem with creating that break in that fire break in an environment like this is that scrub oak has been there for many, many years, and that scrub oak is helping to stabilize the hillsides. When you remove that, you build a house, you put a clear zone around the house, fire break around the house, then you start putting water on that lawn. You now are adding water to a hillside slope area, which can be risky to do. Something that the board should understand is that this is all one huge ravine. This is one huge wash that runs from the north to the south, and that ends down at about the Timpview football field. This is all part of one big wash. What's not in this lot was part of the open space requirement for the subdivision along Little Rock and the other streets on that side. Does that make sense, Ms. Wyndon?
Yes, it does. Helps me understand a lot better. Thank you.
So,
Go ahead,
sorry, Andrew. My thought is, I'm just thinking that, so now that we have a little bit more context, can you, Robert, explain why you guys recommended what you recommended? It sounds like a lot of the planning staff is kind of concerned about the 30%, right? And it sounds like that. So maybe now that we have a little bit of this talking through questions, maybe you can speak to a little bit why you guys recommended the way you recommended.
I'm gonna let Bill field that one.
Okay.
So we certainly are concerned about the 30% slopes, and engineering, I think, has made those concerns pretty clear. The reason why we recommended one unit was that we were persuaded by the criteria that asks whether or not a substantial property right is being denied. This has been an independent parcel. Staff report says it's since at least 1980. I think that's about correct. It's been zoned R110 for many, many years, most of that time, to allow no building permit on it at all. staff was concerned about being challenged over denial of a substantial property right. With one home, that property right is upheld.
Great. Okay. And currently, it's not zoned to build anything.
It's zoned in R110, so one dwelling per 10,000 square feet. So it's residentially zoned.
So it does, and it has more than the 10,000, right?
2.8 acres.
So by establishing that, we're not really changing anything, right?
You're not changing anything with the zoning.
Okay. So you guys had to add that in just to readjust from 3 to 1. Just say, hey, we'll accept this if you do these conditions, and it's not the 3, it's the 1. That kind of why you guys reiterated the 1, even though it's already as is.
Because there is with the zoning that the property currently has, there is a development right there, and that there's a substantial property right that needs to be considered as you think about the variance, right?
Okay. I don't think I have any more questions for staff at this point. I've asked a lot, and I appreciate you guys bearing with me in this.
I just wanted to, ask again, just to be, completely clear what we're, is legitimate for us to consider or not. And it seems there's a significant environmental impact question here, that does raise, public safety and kind of viability in the future and that sort of, question. And well, I find it really interesting to consider that, there is a substantial property right here. You've already considered, well, if they go in, the geological survey says no, then it's no. If they go in and and they say no, is there any kind of requirement to, I guess kind of address any kind of lasting impact that the survey may have had on the on the land and on the slopes that might need to be repaired?
The geotechnical study would have all kinds of recommendations on how to build safely and what kind of mitigation measures should be taken. I've been a planner in both Sandy and Draper and done a lot of hillside development review, and I've seen situations where houses were permitted to be built between 2 earthquake faults. The property is certainly restricted because of those faults, but I've seen situations where they've been permitted even in that type of situation.
Would that be another situation, Bill, that they would have to come back for another variance? Or just the building just allow, hey, it's on the fault, it's good enough, you guys are good, and they'll just approve it?
No, the geotechnical study would identify where those faults are, and the geotechnical study would have recommendations on how far homes need to be from those faults. The engineering department would review all of that data and decide whether or not they agree with that, whether or not it should be reviewed by a third-party geotechnical engineer, or exactly what to do. But the geotechnical study itself makes those recommendations for what is safe to build and how to mitigate any impacts that are created.
Okay.
There are on that hillside very mature scrub oak trees that are probably 30 feet tall. You don't get that very often with that type of tree. If those were cut out of the way to build a road, I'm not sure you could ever restore those back. So if the geotech, if they did that and they found out they couldn't build, they would have to restore it all back. But you're only able to restore what you can, and putting back a tree that's been growing for 100 years is, it'd be almost impossible. So there would be a lasting scar there from the exploration.
And,
and I guess while I'm, go ahead.
I was just going to follow up with a question. So if the geological study comes back and says, "Hey, it's not buildable," Mr. Hyde's not under any obligation to restore it, right?
Part of the grading permit that we would issue would require a bond for that restoration, and we would hold that bond until the restoration that was approved was growing and holding the slope in place like it was designed to.
Okay.
There are a lot of roots to trees that are holding that slope in place right now. So some of that you would lose. You'd probably have to mechanically retain that with some other type of structural elements.
So I'm very sympathetic to your point about the kind of what this represents as far as kind of environmental and kind of ecological potential impact and lasting harm. What I wonder, if staff could kind of tell the board, legally speaking, how much purview do we have to consider that as part of the argument?
I think that 30%. Yeah, if it's going to impact that 30%, and then I think that your purview legally falls within those justification of hardship. If the board finds that there is actual justification, then that is the findings that you should make, and that would support whatever decision you make. That's the construct of the ordinance that you get provided with in order to make those decisions.
Yeah, the ordinance is in place. That protects the hillside. The request is, hey, can I have that ordinance waived?
I don't have any more questions for the staff.
No, I'd be very happy to hear from Mr. Hyde if everyone else is prepared for us to move on. Okay, Mr. Hyde, if you would go ahead and address the board.
Thank you. Mr. Mills, are you able to put up the slope overview map? Do you have that? Brendan Larson had that in his report from last year. So it's the critical slope overview one. I don't think it wasn't in any of your slides you showed today. If that's not something you have, maybe I can try to share a screen. I think it demonstrates what the board is asking questions about much better than any of the slides we've seen so far.
Okay, give us a second.
Robert's going to put up the GIS 30% slope map. Just give a second for us to get that up.
Thank you. It's excellent. Yes, I think this is a great map to show that. I think it's adequate with what we have currently as far as layers. Commissioners and members of the Development Services, I appreciate you being here tonight. I know there's other places you'd rather be on your Thursday evening, and I'm thankful that you're helpful with trying to figure out what to do with this property and how to move forward. I do want to thank Mr. Mills for his presentation. I know there are a lot of challenges with this property, and a big shout out to Bill Pepperoni and his team at Development Services. I've been so impressed with the expertise, just the quality and detail they've put to thoughtfulness of figuring all this out and trying to handle things in an appropriate manner. Kudos to all of them for the great job. I must say that I see this property as an opportunity to build a beautiful jewel in the crown of Provo. I can see in the future this beautiful home that increases the value of the homes around it as well, and I think it's going to be a great project when it's completed. I want to bring up 3 points, and I think it'll help clarify some of the things and questions that I've heard from you board members tonight as well. First, I just want to go over the history just a little bit of the property again. Second, to go over Mr. Mills and the recommendations he talked about. And third is just go over some of those comments that were made by the commissioners from last month's hearing and why they gave the denial and why I think they were in error with that. As you can see on this map here, well, let me back up a little bit. More than 40 years ago, like Mr. Mills described, this property was designated as an R110 single-family dwelling property. Part of an R110 dwelling means that it cannot be landlocked. It needs to have an access point. So the city stubbed an access point from Foothill Drive, and that's that access point that Mr. Marriott was asking about. It needs to have that, and so that access point exists on Foothill Drive. Again, that was the city designated access point so that it's in code with an R110 lot so that a home can be built there. Well, end of last year, I was able to, through serendipitous means, hear about this property being for sale, and I pursued it. And frankly, nothing short of miraculous and divine intervention made it possible for me to purchase the land from Mr. Peterson. But he stopped me before actually selling to me and said, well, I have these 3 neighbors that have shown interest. And he went to his neighbors and he asked them first if they were interested in buying the property. And I guess none of them were, because here I am with the property. When you look at this map, it's easy to see that, up in that northwest corner, there's just a tiny little bit of red. But when you look at that bottom southeast corner where the city stubbed access point is, tons of red. Which side would you want to try to access? It's clear that the easy point is from that northeast point at Little Rock Drive. And just to be clear again, that little red spot there, that is also 30% slope. But as Mr. Mills showed in that city view, the street view from Little Rock Drive, that street view shows that it's about, I'd say, 10 feet deep and about 10 feet down, that what we're talking about as far as critical slope. And Mr. Larson in the last hearing talked about that slope is inconsequential both to the scope of the impact for the surrounding homes as well as to the environment. It's just, it's very small, and it's nothing to be thought of as a problem as far as what I understand from Development Services. And they can correct me if they feel otherwise with that. Again, just to be clear, that is the recommendation from Development Services as the access point. And the other point I want to make with that is, when the board discussed this last month, they didn't even consider that as part of their decision. That wasn't part of the consideration. So when they denied it, it wasn't at all with this 30% slope on Little Rock Drive. It was 100% the slope from Foothill Drive that they denied. They didn't even consider the Little Rock Drive slope. I just want to be really clear with that. And I bring that up because I asked tonight, as a minimum, you modify the board's decision from last month and allow access as the professionals, the professional engineers from Development Services recommended, that you follow the recommendation allowing me to have access to my property from that spot. Now, going on with the story a little bit, I obtained this property. I could see that clearly that spot from Little Rock Drive was the best access point. And so I talked to the neighbors about getting an easement or buying a piece of the property so I could access my property. And the Widener family was agreeable with considering that, but they said, oh, we belong to an HOA. hit a brick wall. For the next 2 months, I negotiated with the HOA, made concessions, offered them large sums of money. All of my offers were refused, though, and I could. It was an impasse. I couldn't see a way around. And so I went back to the original access point that was granted by the city more than 40 years ago as the only accessible option I had. And that's how we got to this point today. The city, the Planning Commission heard the arguments and ultimately denied access to my property from that. And so with this story, as there's a backstory to this as well. And the backstory is kind of critical to this. And that is the HOA, Quail Valley HOA, is interested in the city of Provo taking over their roads and sewers. However, it would probably already be done. There's a caveat though. The sewers are outdated. It'll take about $200,000 in upgrading to go up to code with what the current sewers are for the city of Provo. Now, according to Development Services, these meetings for public hearings and to you commissioners as well will start occurring at the beginning of the year. I bring that up because this has a huge impact upon how my ability to deal with the HOA will occur. The HOA will no longer own those roads. They will no longer own the sewer at that point. And I will have some negotiating power, hopefully, with dealing with the HOA and being able to have access to my property from Little Rock Drive. To be clear, I see three main players here. I see the city having the fiduciary responsibility to provide an R110 zone single-family dwelling property with an access point, or they'll be in violation of code. I see me as a property owner wanting to have access to my property, and I see third, the HOA wanting the city to take over their roads. And I see this as just a perfect situation and solution where everyone can be happy. The city can have access point for that R110 designated property. I can have access to my property, and the HOA will have the roads taken over and the sewers taken over by the city. It's a win-win for everyone. And frankly, I think it's beautiful how well it meshes together and how it solves the problem for everyone. And I look down the road and I see this is how that's going to work out. It just makes sense. This is how this is ultimately going to work out. It's just going to take a few months to get there. I wanted to bring up the second point again. Mr. Mills read to you the recommendations, and I want to be clear, this is the same recommendation that was in the first hearing as well, and that is that the access be granted at the north end of the lot located at 3700 North Little Rock Drive. And then finally, I just want to read some of these comments from the commissioners from the hearing last month. I don't know what to say. I mean, I read through some of these and they're almost farcical. I'll let you decide for yourselves, but I'll just read through some of them. Commissioner Akagwa, a hardship exists, but it is not unreasonable. It does impact a property right, but it is not unreasonable. She followed up that comment by saying, well, you could take a helicopter and go and access your property. Commissioner Dave Anderson, I am afraid of an inherent characteristic of a property being found to be an unreasonable hardship. I am not accustomed to seeing variances granted for slope requirements. I do not think it is fair game to grant, let me read that again. I do not think it is fair game to grant a variance for a restriction that was established to protect sensitive lands. Mr. Mills went over those 5 variance criteria in code 14.05.030. Those 5 criteria are yes and no questions. They don't care about your feelings. They don't care about what you think. They are facts. If you're able to answer all of those questions, yes, then by the code, you should allow the variance to go forward, period. Commissioner Lisa Jensen, this property does not have the same circumstances as the other properties. Building in a hazardous area is contrary to the public interest. I've had 3 separate professionals look at this property and evaluate it for whether a road can be built there safely. All 3 indicate it can be done in a safe and very aesthetic manner. If you look up and down the Wasatch Front, there are numerous examples of roads that have gone down 30% slopes in a very safe manner. I know this can be done. As my final point, commissioners, I want you to look at this critical overlay slope map because I find it ironic that fully half of my surrounding neighbors fall also into this critical overlay slope. If you look at Mr. Miller's home just to the north of the access point, fully half of his home is in that critical access slope. I'm not even asking to build my home on this slope. I just want to put a road through it. The bottom of it's a 3-acre property. There's a lot of usable land in the bottom that's not part of this slope at all. If you look at several of my other neighbors, either parts of their homes or parts of the landscaping they've done on their property violate this critical access. Of those 5 criteria, one of them is if the property owner is being denied a substantial right that his other neighbors have, then he should be allowed to have the variance. Where is the justice? These homes are violating that critical access slope, yet I'm not being allowed to have access to my property. And you'll say maybe, well, they were grandfathered in because they built this and did this before this code existed. But that is exactly the point my attorney makes when he says, if we take this to court, we will win it for that reason only. The city gave the property, the access point, more than 40 years ago. I don't want to go to court. I think it's ugly. I don't want to go there. All I want is access to my property. And commissioners, I'd ask that you would at least either one, modify the initial denial from last month and give me access from the recommended spot on Little Rock Drive, or 2, probably the correct legal answer, allowing me to have access to either of these points because I do satisfy all the variant criteria that are expected in 14-05-030. May justice be served. I defer to your wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I have a question.
Does anyone have any questions for the applicant before we move to public comment?
Yeah, I do. Appreciate your presentation, Mark. You're having to go through a bunch of us city people, and there's probably different opinions and lots of things. So appreciate your patience as we ask some questions here. One of the questions that kind of came to my mind as we were going through this was the access point at Little Rock Drive. You talked about the HOA and who owns the road and access. Is there going to be a problem? And maybe this is for Robert as well, a question, but is there going to be a problem with Little Rock Drive? Are we permitted to give access to a road that is private or not? Do either of you guys know the answer to that?
If I could answer that, so again, Little Rock Drive will come under the purview of the city of Provo once the city of Provo takes over the streets and the sewage.
So currently it's not?
It's private. It's private. It's part of the HOA.
So are we even allowed to give access to it? Oh, go ahead, Robert.
Let me just jump in really quick and say that Little Rock Drive is a private road that is not currently under the purview of the city. So those are details that would need to be worked out at a later date. If under your purview, what you're dealing with right now is just determining whether that is a reasonable justification and that's what you want to grant. So all of those details would be worked out later, but currently Little Rock Drive is not a public street. It is a private drive.
Okay, that was my main question, and we're allowed to still grant a variance on something that's actually not private, like seems a little bit weird to say, oh yeah, we'll give you access through this person's yard, right? Is that even allowed by our standards as the Board of Adjustment, right? To say, hey, this is private, but you can go through it anyway.
You're just, if that was the one that you were to choose, you are saying this would be what we're comfortable with. It's now the responsibility of the applicant to go through, understand the feasibility of that and make it happen. If they can't make it happen, that's that's on the applicant and between two private entities, not between the city at that point. It's just the city feels that that is the best way to move forward if that's your decision. But the feasibility would have to be worked out later. Does that make sense, Wes?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's just, yeah.
I would also.
It's a funny one because it's like, yeah, you can go through the neighbor's backyard if you figure that out, right? But I get it, because if there's some plausibility of it turning into a more public road, then I get the recommendation. I was just trying to understand a little bit of how, if that's even helpful, right? Or not.
And because the feasibility of the road on Foothill Drive, it seems remote in the professional opinion of the engineers here.
Okay, that helps. The Foothill Drive thing that you wasn't aware of.
Let me connect with one thing. This map that you're seeing in front of you is really helpful and useful, and I think it's good that Mark brought this up. And I would just also make sure to add the caveat that the way that this information is derived needs to be further explored on the ground. And so this is the best estimation of where those slopes are actually at. But further on the ground reconnaissance is what you need to actually determine exactly where it's 30% or 40% or 10%, if that makes sense. So the map is helpful to graphically represent the general understanding, but that's all it is. It's just the best representation from a high level understanding. Now I'll be here with your questions.
Wes, do you have any more questions before we pass over to Marin?
Not at this moment. I may have some more, but Marie can take the time.
Please go ahead.
Okay, I just had a question. Just generally speaking, when were the homes constructed that encircled this property?
I guess
mine was built in '77.
Yeah, I guess I'll take a stab at that and say probably within the last 4 decades.
Okay. So just here and there over the last 40 years or so.
I'm sure that development has occurred, kind of mid-century on.
All right. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Hyde, there's been a little bit of discussion so far about the environmental impacts, some of it about removal of sensitive vegetation. There's been some discussion of what the impact of residential water usage on the property might cause. I wonder if you might be able to speak to some of those concerns.
Thank you. Those are great concerns. Absolutely. It's for that reason I endorse as well the Development Services recommendation for the Little Rock Drive site for access. That slope on off of Foothill Drive, even though it's the city designated access point, is challenging. Yes, it is overcomable, but it is challenging, and to bring it back to its pristine nature that it is currently would be next to impossible. Could it be secured in a safe manner? Yes, it could be secured in a safe manner. I think I've had several people who have evaluated and indicated that's the case. As far as water flow and whatnot, I mean, it's called Little Rock Canyon for a reason. It comes down from Little Rock Canyon. You can see that numerous homes have been built above where the ravine used to go. And so as far as flow, there's a dry riverbed at the bottom that hasn't seen water for over 40 years. If there were a huge thunderstorm or something, maybe that water would flow slightly, but I don't think it would be significant, and definitely don't see it being to the point where it would be an issue where the integrity of those slopes would be affected. At the bottom of the property, you can see there, again, it's 3 acres. There's a lot of usable land right at the bottom where there isn't any color. That's where the home would be. And there's not going to be drainage happening in that portion of the property to any significant degree.
Thank you.
I have one more question, I think, and this is probably my last, but one of the, I love talking about the five criteria because that's just what we do here, you know. One of the points that's maybe sticking or maybe not, and Mr. Hyde, you can probably answer this, but is subsection 4 where it says, it will not be contrary to the public interest. What do you have to say about that? What have neighbors said? What have people said in the neighborhood? What is the public saying? And I'm sure we'll have some commentary, but what have you seen and done on your side?
Be happy to. Yeah, there was a lot of public interest in this property at the last commissioners meeting. Concerns again for their homes are going to slide right off the hill and fall into the ravine. And while I don't have my crystal ball to say that that's not going to happen, I think the reality is that everyone in the development business and the engineers that are involved, they don't want that to happen, and that they're going to do things in as safe manner as possible. There are numerous examples of where those principles have been adhered to and it's been done safely. And there are examples, unfortunately, where they have not been adhered to and there has been disaster that struck. Again, I hope to stay as far away from that slope as possible, so that's not even an issue. I'll just read Mr. Larson in the staff report from the last meeting on section 4. He writes, the variance will not substantially affect the general plan or be contrary to public interest. The applicant will still need to show to engineering and the building division of Provo City that a building can be built safe and to code as to not cause risk to the surrounding area. The development services has agreed that this can be done in a safe manner as long as a code is adhered to.
Any more questions?
No more questions from me.
Okay, so hearing no more questions for the applicant from the board, let's open up to public comment. Is there someone there from staff who can kind of field those in an orderly manner for us?
Yeah, let me go ahead and share the PowerPoint again that has the instructions for calling in or providing additional comments. And while that's queuing up, I actually have 3 public comments that were submitted via email. So while people are getting ready, let me just go ahead and read these in to the record. This is from Stephen Gibson. Dear Provo City Board of Adjustment, I was surprised to see that Mark Hyde is appealing the September 8th unanimous denial of variance request PLVAR 2021-0177. As the Planning Commission voted on that night, supporting Brandon Larson and his staff's recommendation, Mr. Hyde's right to access his property does not outweigh the rights of at least 2 other property owners around 3605 Foothill Drive. Those property owners have the right to safety. To quote the Planning Commission staff report, quote, Public Works recommends against cutting a road from Foothill Drive through the right-of-way established by an adjacent subdivision. The area is very steep and 2 different geotech companies asked to study the area for the owner and access through this right-of-way have expressed their opinion to Provo Engineering that cutting a road here is not advisable, close quote. The slope at 3605 Foothill Drive is, as the variance request letter states, plus or minus 50%. Creating access on a slope that steep would be dangerous not only for the geotech company's crews involved, but for the occupants of the currently existing properties. One substantial property right enjoyed by other nearby properties is safety. Construction and operation of a road cut out of a slope that steep threatens to interfere with the property rights and values of existing properties. Planning Commission staff stated during the meeting that the removal of the trees on the 50% slope at 3605 Foothill Drive would erode the hill that supports the foundation of 3655 Foothill Drive, degrading it. Similarly, danger to the house at 3577 Foothill Drive would be increased by the removal of the trees as mudslides become more likely. Building a road at 3605 Foothill Drive would damage the slope. The road, as variance request PLVAR 2021-0177 states, would allow for the testing for faults farther down the hill. Should faults be found, as they have been found in adjacent properties, building homes in the gully would be impossible, but the damage to the hill and the continuing risk to homes at both 3655 and 3577 Foothill Drive would remain. Provo Public Works, two different geotech companies, the Provo Planning Commission, and the Provo residents at the September 8th meeting all argued and or voted against the variance. Their arguments and the flaws with the original variance are all reasons Mark Hyde's appeal should be denied. Sincerely, Stephen Gibson at 3265 Mohican Lane. This is from Shannon Keeley. Dear Provo City Board of Adjustment, my name is Shannon Keeley and I'm a Provo homeowner impacted by the upcoming appeal from Mark Hyde, which your committee will review tomorrow, Thursday, October 21st. The Planning Commission staff unanimously voted to deny variance request, then the number, on September 8th, 2021. Their decision was based on a thorough review of the Hillside development standards and a lengthy discussion on reasons for granting the variance. They concluded that Mr. Hyde's request was not eligible for a variance. I truly hope that their decision will stand. The proposed road not only violates the city's Hillside development standards, Provo City Code 1505-160, but it also threatens structures, property values, and potentially lives in our neighborhood. The Hillside development standards exist to help us make the right decision in moments exactly like this one. We all sympathize with Mr. Hyde, who has purchased land in the gully and seeks an access point. However, by the city's own codes, the land at 3605 Foothill Drive is simply not an option as it has a 50% slope, well beyond the 30% limit set by the city. The Hillside development standards contained in the Provo City Code 1505-160, Section 1, Item B states, quote, any land or parcel having a slope of greater than 10% shall be deemed to be land having a steep slope within the meaning of this chapter. No person shall be permitted to grade, cut, excavate, fill, or to erect any structure on undisturbed hillside areas that exceed a slope greater than 30%. Any person proposing to grade, cut, excavate, fill, or to erect any structure on any slope or hillside with a slope between 10% and 30% shall be required to submit a geologic report which meets the standards and requirements of this chapter, close quote. Exceptions are detailed in Section F. Quote, exceptions for grading hillside slopes which exceed 30% may be granted for the following. Construction of public streets and utilities by Provo City to provide city infrastructure, maintenance and reconstruction of public and private utilities where necessary, close quote. The purpose of Mr. Hyde's proposed road is to conduct testing to determine if a home can be built in the gully. This clearly does not qualify as an exception. Furthermore, geotesting in this exact area has already concluded that fault lines prohibit development. Endangering current structures to build this road simply to learn that fault lines prohibit more development makes the undertaking even more illogical. Building this road requires grading, cutting, excavating, activities explicitly prohibited by the city code, and with good reason. The removal of trees and shrubs on this hillside causes dangerous erosion. Tree roots form an essential network that prevents soil erosion, keeping the current structures on the rim of the gully safe. The foundations of the current structures rely on this vegetation to stay secure. Removing trees and vegetation for an exploratory road simply does not make sense. If built, the road itself poses even further danger. Foothill Drive currently has a few roads that lead down toward University Avenue, and they are all very dangerous in the winter. Quail Valley, for example, experiences sliding cars daily during snow and ice. Accidents on Quail Valley are frequent, and homes along this road have been hit numerous times by sliding cars. Bus routes are changed constantly throughout the winter to avoid driving up Quail Valley, as well as other steep roads that branch off Foothill. Quail Valley is less than 30% slope. Imagine construction and geotech vehicles larger than the buses that can't access Quail Valley in the winter traveling on this proposed road that is greater than 50% slope. Our home sits feet away from this structure, and our yard borders the path of the road. The possibility of vehicles losing control or sliding into our home, or worse, to our children playing in our yard just feet from the road is both significant and terrifying. Granting a road would create a huge liability for the city. The gully is a treasure, and I can easily see how Mr. Hyde saw this beautiful piece of land and got swept away with thoughts of his dream home. Undoubtedly, He is in an incredibly frustrating position. However, he had the opportunity to review the city codes and hillside development standards before purchasing this land. We all sympathize that finding a route into the gully is proving difficult, but that doesn't mean that we should disregard the hillside standards that were created to protect us in situations exactly like this. The prospect of developing this gully land is very complex, but you're not being asked to resolve all of Mr. Hyde's development obstacles. You're just being asked to uphold the decision made by the Planning Commission about one road. I urge you to deny the variance and protect the homes and people who live along the gully. The current code has been created to protect our land and our current structures, and we can't disregard it just because one person purchased land that is challenging to access. This final one is from Sally Farrell. This is a public comment for item 2, the appeal of Mark Hyde in the public hearing of the Board of Adjustment. We strongly oppose the proposed development in the Timpview Draw and encourage you to deny the appeal to the Planning Commission decision of September 8th, 2021. In the spring, Provo Fire Department personnel came around to each house individually in our neighborhood to speak to homeowners regarding fire risk. We also received an email from the Provo Fire Risk Analysis instructing us how to reduce the fuel loads around our homes. He also met in person with as many neighbors as were willing and instructed us on our individual properties out what trees and brush to get rid of. The fire department also organized a chipping program for all of us who back up or adjacent to wildland urban interface to make it even easier for us to get rid of that fuel load and reduce the fire risk for ourselves and our neighbors. It seems abundantly clear that the fire department definitely wants residents to take the wildfire risk seriously and reduce that potential in all the ways that are possible. The simulation video he included in the email is especially powerful in showing what would happen in the event of a wildfire in this area. Though the simulated video shows what happens if the fire starts by the Timpview football field, I'm confident the end result is the same if a fire starts somewhere else within the Timpview Draw. This development is specifically in an area we were told, 1, is highly flammable, and 2, we need to actively reduce our fuel loads to better protect our homes and families. It seems nonsensical and downright dangerous to the existing neighbors above for anyone to then attempt to build down in that exact area. Simply because an individual or company purchases land does not give them the right to build if that then endangers existing homeowners, their families, and their property. With all the wildfires throughout the West every year and the tremendous impact and risk they impose on local and state firefighting personnel, the loss of life and property, the serious damage, devastation they cause to nature, and the water resources they use, etc., it is obvious that we definitely should eliminate or substantially reduce where we can't eliminate that risk whenever possible. One of our neighbors is a valiant firefighter. He was away from his family for weeks on end this year fighting fires. Why should he and his family be required to also confront totally unnecessary fire risk in their own backyard due to a proposed development in an area in which our own city fire and safety personnel have aggressively acted to reduce fuel loads? There are plenty of other powerful reasons to oppose development in this area, such as earthquake fault lines, landslide potential, drainage issues, the cost to provide power and gas down there, the incredibly steep inclines needed to even reach the proposed development area, etc. We urge you to deny this appeal and any other request to develop in the Timpview Draw. It is incredibly unfortunate for Mr. Hyde that he has land on which he may not be able to eventually build. That is a hardship, and we are not unsympathetic to his feelings on this. But the fact that he has invested in this land and has further invested in retaining firms or services to advocate on his behalf does not give him the right to endanger the hundreds of residents currently living in homes connected to the Timpview Draw. That would be a risk and a hardship placed on the rest of us that is totally unreasonable. If the city needs to rezone part of the draw to prevent residential development where the fire department has deemed it highly flammable and hazardous, we encourage such steps to take place.
Murray, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, we can.
Taz, are you speaking? We can't hear you if you are.
Taz, I'm going to come back to you later.
Hear me now? Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Can I go ahead and talk now?
Yes,
Go
please.
ahead.
Okay, sorry about that. Right. I'm sympathetic with wanting to develop private property right up until it imposes on other people's property in a significant way. And I think this one is one of those. The fire risk you just talked about is a real deal. I mean, it's in the bottom of a gully that's pretty dry with a lot of live, a lot of mature oak in there that would burn pretty hot, and it would burn up the hill to all the houses around the canyon. So I think that's a pretty real risk. I own the property just to the north of it borders the property that's in consideration. I also worry about destabilization, whether it comes from the west side or the east side. I think there's a significant risk of destabilization. I think rebuilding Timberview High right now is a pretty good example of that, where water has come out of this canyon, maybe not on the surface, but underneath, and has moved a lot of the property, the clay that's under this property in a significant way. So I think the destabilization is real, and just the fact that there's this beautiful growth back there that would be permanently damaged. I think that's kind of a consideration. I guess just two more quick things. One, I appreciate Mr. Hyde wanting to stand up for his property rights, but he wants to do it at the expense of others. So it's interesting to me that he's demanding his property.
I think we
wants to tread on, build across the homeowners association, and I think you mentioned Leo Widener, and he had so I don't know.
I think we probably had a good enough commentary from Taz.
Sorry.
We can't hear you half the time, and you're kind of cutting out, but I think we've kind of heard what you've meant to share. Is that okay if we move on?
Yeah, that's okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Caller 000, go ahead.
Hello, this is John Payne. Can you hear me?
Yes, John, go ahead.
Thank you. My wife and I live at 1175 Mountain Ridge Road. We're the property that touches the south tip of this property that's being considered. I have some very serious concerns of how this is going to be developed, if at all. I'd like to know how and where the utilities are going to be accessed. Where will the sewer and the storm sewer drain to? I know you wouldn't be required to pump uphill in order to get into Quail or up onto Foothill. So where are you going to have your sewer connected to? Are you going to have to go all the way down the hill, down the ravine, and connect up behind Timberview High School? Are you going to allow a septic for sewer drainage? How about storm sewer? If you build 2 or 3 homes in that area there, you're going to be building a driveway to get down to it, or excuse me, a roadway to get down to it, and then roads in and around the properties. In a 100 or 200 year storm, which we've seen significant repeats along the Wasatch Front in the last few years, what happens to the storm sewer or the surface drainage? It would be going downhill, and it would undermine my property there at the southern tip of yours. You're going to be required to retain your storm sewer or your surface water onto your property or pond or do something else. I'm just wondering how this is all going to come together. The surface drainage will undermine the uphill properties down the rest of the ravine. The accesses from Little Rock and also Foothill will be greater than the 30% grade, perhaps up to 50%. How will the city vehicles, garbage, fire, emergency vehicles, and so on, get up and down such a steep grade, and especially during the wintertime? The property below the development was supposed to be remain in natural landscape, wildlife preserve. What will happen to it, and with the substantially increased traffic and access from above? If the top part of the ravine is developed with roads, lanes, driveways, concrete, asphalt, etc., about the water draining downhill, what would be required to slow the flow, so to speak, and prevent major erosion further downhill the ravine? I see a lot of problems with the development of this. Even one house down in there and required infrastructure putting into here. We're opposed to this, and we don't want to see this property developed the way it's been proposed without answers to these major questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any more people on the line?
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, so this is Brian Gibson. Hopefully you can hear me. So I live at 3577 immediately to the south of the proposed road from the Foothill side. And I just want to make a couple points. I was in the last meeting on September 8th, and I didn't feel like the Planning Commission's comments were farcical or that their logic was repugnant. Some of the adjectives that Mr. Hyde has used to describe their decision. I'm grateful to them for protecting the public interest and protecting, frankly, the stability of my property and the safety of my family. You have to ask, it was a 7-0 unanimous decision just a month ago. And the major question I think that the board should consider tonight is what has changed. The law is still the same. The code still says that you can't develop on stuff that is steeper than 30 degrees. The Foothill side, by Mr. Hyde's own admission, is 50 degrees. The Little Rock side, by his admission, is greater than 30 degrees. It's also a fact that hasn't changed that there's fault lines all over this area. The local high school is being retrofit to keep it safe and keep our children safe. The fact of the matter is that 2 of geotech companies hired by Mr. Hyde said it was inadvisable to access from the Foothill side. If he gets down there and discovers that there's fault, as Mr. Day said earlier, there will be a lasting scar either on the Little Rock side or the Foothill side. And not only will we have more earthquake risk, the stability of the homes will be affected. And that hasn't changed. And Mr. Hyde's arguments haven't even addressed those facts. And has said by an earlier caller, his rights to develop his property should end where our rights to safety and stability of our properties begin. I think that is a question of justice. He mentioned justice a lot during his lengthy comments, and I think it's something to consider. You've gotten a taste, board, of the widespread community opposition. There's plenty of opposition on the Foothill side, and the 70-member HOA on the Little Rock side is well represented in this meeting, I believe, and was represented in the earlier meeting. And so I think that needs to be considered. I think on the basis of these facts alone, you could support the Planning Commission's unanimous decision, but there are other factors about development in the gully in general that have only been touched on. The first one is fire risk, and it is extreme. The Provo Fire Department has not even been consulted about this, I imagine, or if they have, I don't know. But this is described as an extreme fire risk area. My conversation with Mr. Hyde months ago, he said the first home he wanted to build was 5,500 square feet. That's 5,500 square feet of fuel for a potential fire. And we've all been asked at our own expense to clear a 33-foot perimeter from our structures for the safety of the community. So there's that factor. The wildlife impact, one of your own board members has mentioned, there's issues like noise pollution and emergency vehicles access as well have all been mentioned. One of the issues and one of the words, and I'll wrap up soon because I know the time is valuable, is this idea of a hardship. I think that my response is simply that if it is indeed a hardship, then it was one Mr. Hyde was certainly aware of prior to buying the property, a choice he made of his own free will. This is not a case, as he contends in his appeal letter, of the city created this situation and must provide a solution. It certainly isn't a case where surrounding longtime residents should have to suffer hardships of their own to accommodate the dire desires of one lone individual. And one final point that I want to make to consider, and I'm almost done and I'll finish, I'm sorry, is the Provo Commission rightly protected the city of Provo from a massive liability if this development is allowed to continue, because of the fire risk, because of the earthquake risk, and the risk to the stability of the surrounding homes. Thank you.
Caller 210, go ahead. Caller 210.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I want to thank the board for this meeting tonight and for all the staff who put the work into this hearing. We're grateful for your consideration. I'm Aaron Miller. I'm one of the property owners, my wife and I. We actually own the property that's already been mentioned before that sits just east of Mr. Hyde's property along Foothill Drive. And the slope map that was shown earlier, ours is the one that he referenced, was sitting half of it on that 30% slope. I just want to add some additional insight and speak specifically to the variance request for access along Foothill Drive. Obviously, we have pretty intense concerns with that, as the road and the impact that would happen is most directly aligns essentially right along the backside of our property. Hillside is extremely steep. I submitted in my email comment a picture of a patio in our backyard that actually cracked because of settling some years before we bought our home. There was a question earlier about when the homes in the neighborhood were built. I can't speak to the others. Our home was built in 1969, obviously many years before we bought it. I do wonder about the accuracy of the map and as the 30% slope overlays our house. Our house doesn't sit at 30%, but it is very steep immediately behind our home. Obviously, our concern is that those very large oak trees that have been there for a long time that were referenced earlier are essentially holding up the hillside on the backside of our house. We have very serious concerns. I know Mr. Hyde referenced earlier that there have been some plans that he's been offered from professionals that could indicate stability. We have no idea what those plans are and haven't been told what they might be. So we can't express any confidence in what they may be without knowing what they are. It's also worth pointing out that I don't think it makes the point that Mr. Hyde thinks it does when he says that our house sits on this slope area. When our house was built, it wasn't built in a way that endangered any uphill or downhill homes. There were no homes that could be put at risk because of the impact on the slope that was made at the time our house was built. This is a material difference between his situation and the situation when our house was built, because there were no other homes around it, or I should say uphill or downhill from it, that could have been affected by the disturbance of the hillside. That's a difference that I think would be important in any legal analysis as well. And so I want to make sure I just am speaking clearly that specifically regarding his request to get a variance to access the property on the foothill side, we're strongly opposed because of substantial risk. I'm literally sitting in the part of the house that could have a damaged foundation because of the hillside disturbance. And we obviously don't want to see that happen. As many of the other neighbors have said, we are sympathetic to the challenges here, but very concerned because of the risk to our property. And I think of any of the homes along this property line, ours is probably the one that's most at risk. So our concern is probably the greatest. Thank you for your time.
Caller 840, go ahead. Press *6 to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I am a mom and I had to pull over to make this comment. So just give me 30 seconds to get in a safe position. I am a neighbor of Mr. Miller's. I live along Foothill, directly next to the access point at 3605 Foothill, which is one of the proposed access points, the one you've been referring to as the north access point for this exploratory road into the gully. I just am really begging you to uphold the decision that was made by the city planning committee on September 8th. Mr. Hyde quoted some of your colleagues in what I felt was a pretty unflattering way, but my observation from that meeting is that the planning commission spent a great deal of time and care reviewing the variance and examining all of the criteria for granting a variance. All 7 concluded that his request simply does not meet the criteria for granting a variance, and that's why they unanimously voted to deny the variance. My understanding on what you're deciding on tonight in this meeting, is an access point to build a road to get down into the gully. And if you overturn this ruling, it gives Mr. Hyde permission to clear out huge portions of vegetation and build a road on a 50% slope, well beyond the 30% limit set by the city. And as so many people and neighbors have pointed out, this vegetation simply cannot be replaced, and it immediately threatens our structures. We have all experienced the earthquake in recent times, which severely impacted Simview High School and other structures in our area. If something like that were to happen after these trees have been removed, it would really be damaging to our structures. The Hillside standards were created to give us clear guidance in moments exactly like the one we are in right now. And I do understand the concern about how Mr. Hyde will develop his land without this road. But our purpose here, as I understand it, which my understanding might not be perfect, but I don't feel like we have to resolve all of his development challenges tonight in this moment in this meeting. The purpose of this decision is to determine if an existing city code should be ignored to build an exploratory road. The city planning committee has already said no. Your own city engineers have already said no. And so many neighbors like me have all said no. There has not been one voice other than Mr. Hyde himself who has agreed that this could be a good idea or that this does not pose problems. I understand that this code seems to sit in conflict with Mr. Hyde's right to access his property, and I do sympathize with that. It must be incredibly frustrating. And your board is in a very tricky position of having to decide basically which code are you going to adhere to. But I do believe that the code protecting existing structures rather than hypothetical structures, which may not even be able to be built, should supersede in this situation. And I just really hope that you'll choose to listen to your own city's planners, engineers, and residents, and please prevent access at 3605 Foothill, and please continue to protect our homes and our families. And I really thank you for listening and giving me a moment to pull my car over and get situated.
Caller 840, please state your first and last name for the record.
Shannon Keeley.
Thank you. Caller 841, go ahead. Caller
This is
841.
Jeff Cutler. Yes, this is caller 1841.
Yes, go ahead.
This is Jeff Cutler. I'm the president of the Quail Valley HOA, and I just spoke to the owner of that property, the Wagners, and the husband, whom unfortunately he passed away a number of months ago. I spoke with his wife, and she's adamant she does not want to sell or divide her property for the road. The concern is on the access on the Little Rock Drive. There's on that entrance, it drops off quite steeply. That's why there's not a house built there. It drops off from the road fairly quickly to a thick scrub oak and other trees. So if you put a road through that, you're going to be ripping out all the trees that are stabilizing that slope, which is right next to the road. So that's going to cause problems. And I don't know if the planning commission knows this, but Little Rock Drive sits on about a 100-foot deep pile of sand. It's just all sand there. So stabilization is very, very critical. Is why we need trees there. And the other issue is the primary. We're trying to turn over our streets and utilities to the city, so we want them in the very good condition that they are in now. We don't want to have any damage to them for fear of that would jeopardize the potential transfer of our roads to the city. So that's of primary importance too. We don't want construction traffic or utilities tapped, until we get those transferred over to the Provo city's ownership, like most of the rest of the city. That's pretty much my comments on that. I do have great sympathy for Mr. Hyde on that investment down there, but it is just be very problematic coming in from Little Rock Drive once you stand and look at the proposed entrance for that. Thank you. That's all my comments.
Caller 622, go ahead. Press star 6 to mute.
Great. Am I unmuted there?
Yes.
Perfect. My name is Court Godfrey. I'm a resident in the Quail Valley area. In fact, I live in the condominium that would be right across the area from where he is requesting access in Quail Valley. And so in regards, kind of just going back to Mr. Marriott's question at the beginning when he asked Mr. Hyde regarding public sentiment, I think it's kind of pretty clear that public sentiment is not in Mr. Hyde's favor. Last month, there was, to my recollection, not one person in favor of him constructing in the gully, and tonight that seems to be repeated. There doesn't seem to be anyone in public support of the development of the gully. Do I sympathize with Mr. Hyde? I do. Is this a chance or an opportunity or perhaps an occasion where enough due diligence wasn't done? Possibly, but I guess my question would be to Mr. Hyde is, does he really want to be that guy who is so determined to build a house, even at the detriment or even the anger of all the neighbors that would surround that? And I think another thing that would be is that he seems now to be waiting for Quail Valley's road to be taken over so that he could have easier access from this point of view. My understanding is that the roads would, if they are taken over, that those would be the public city roads, but the red section that he is seeking access to is private property, and one that surely White does not want to subdivide or does not want to sell or does not want to grant access to. And so those are things to consider. I think another thing to consider is even if he does get access through Foothill, I understand that the access to those property lines were granted maybe 30 to 40 years ago. And as we're learning through much that occurs over time, things change over time. And so what might have been a good idea then is clearly not a good idea now with all the information, engineering, and studying that has occurred. And so those are things to consider. And I think lastly that I would like to say is I can totally understand why Mr. Hyde would like to build down there. I walk out my front door and I look across that gully and it's beautiful. And there's no houses down there. It's open space. And I think that's what makes it beautiful. And the second that you put a property on there, that is all gone, and the open space that we're losing in Provo is gone. And what was once a beautiful property becomes one more place with a normal house on it that is not the crown jewel of Provo, as he's stating, but another house taking up a little bit of the last open space that is here in the area. And so those are my points of view, and I appreciate the committee for letting us have a voice in this. Thank you.
There are no more public comments.
I just want to ask staff just a kind of a procedural question. Is there a reason why we should read the chat comments? I know it's kind of a non-typical contribution matter, but since those comments have been put in there, should they be read into the record?
We can read those into the record, but several of them were made not during the public comment period, so we can work on that. But we actually have one person here with us in the room that would like to make a comment, so.
Let's start there.
Can I just speak? Yeah. Okay. Hi, my name is Bill Cushenberry, and I am a neighbor of Court Godfrey who just spoke, and I too live across the street from the proposed entry point on Little Rock Drive. I know that property because I go over there frequently and look down into the gully, just like Court does. We love that spot, and we see the fence down there, and I think some in-person reconnaissance would be really appropriate before we make any kind of decision as looking into the gully from that point, because it does drop off more steeply than 30%. Matter of fact, where Mr. Hyde's fence line is, you can see it from there. It drops continually down from that point down into the gully. So the thought of putting a road in there would be a tremendously steep challenge, not only a steep angle, but a steep challenge to be able to put that in there. And I know that if a road is put in there to accommodate exploratory vehicles, would be detrimental to the Widener's property. You can't not do that. I mean, you can't not have that affect that, because all those little scrub oaks have got to come out of there to accommodate all of that. They have to. And not only that, the access point, Little Rock Drive itself, is this being the private road that it is not the same size as your normal road in the rest of Provo City, and it would impact the traffic patterns within our community for however long period of time that takes. And if we even get the variance, if Mr. Hyde gets the variance, and we have construction vehicles going down that road, that's going to be impact to our way of life. And I would just like somebody to consider that as a consideration as we go forward with this. I do like Mr. Hyde's sense of taste as far as the location. As Court said, it's a beautiful area. You did really well with that property. I wish I could figure out a solution for you, but I just want to say that those of us that have opposed you have not done it personally. It's all been, as a matter of fact, is just what we want to keep. Is we moved up there because we want to keep what we have up there. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I want to go to your comment, Mr. Rennick, of reading the comments in from the chat. Now, would you be able to do that, because I can't see who made the comment?
Yes, Clark Capital Partners. I see that you're on. If you raise your hand, you can go ahead and make the comment to the board members. Clark Capital Partners. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I haven't been able to listen to the entire meeting, so I apologize if I'm repeating things, but I am a member of the HOA, and I know that we are concerned as a group with slope stability and access from our neighborhood. I don't believe Mr. Hyde has been in contact with us since March, because we indicated that we have very crowded streets and there are parking issues within our neighborhood. and we didn't want to allow additional access and congestion into our streets, in addition to the concerns for slope stability and general safety. So it has been discussed and thoughtfully contemplated within our community. And I just want to, it puzzles me a little bit that the Planning Commission, or that the city, the staff recommendation could recommend an access point that they have no authority to authorize when our street is private. And there is also an additional strip of private land next to it between the street and Mr. Hyde's property. A lot of the information that he provided regarding our streets and our water and our sewer system is inaccurate. I'm not sure where he got that information from. It certainly wasn't us. So I just want to clarify that matter. And I don't know if I've heard this issue addressed, but when was the 30% slope restriction put in place? If it was prior to the purchase of the property by Mr. Hyde, it would seem that he bought a property without any access. Therefore, you aren't really denying him something that he had. The previous owner might have had it in conjunction with their house that is adjacent to that property. But to me, that seems kind of an important point that I haven't heard addressed. That's the sum of my comments.
Could you
Thank
please
you.
state your first and last name for the record, please?
My name is Malia Vaughn.
Thank you. Rebecca Snow, did you want to make a comment? Rebecca Snow, did you want to make a comment? Caller 220, go ahead. Press *6 to unmute.
Hi, my name is Meredith Godfrey. I am Court Godfrey's wife. I live on Little Rock Drive, directly across from where Mr. Hyde would like the access point to be. In addition, agreeing to everything that's been said, I just wanted to also mention one of my big reasons for not wanting access to that point is that this neighborhood, we have tons of little children, and here in our home we have 3 small children, 4 and under, and they like to play out front, run around, and it would just be a huge safety concern for me having, heavy machinery, all the vehicles, etc. So I'd just like to mention that as well.
I think that takes care of everybody, right?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Should we close the public comment, Andrew?
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, I was taking some notes. So yes, let's go ahead and close the public comment, and we will open it up for the board members to begin to deliberate. Well, I won't make the first comment. I'll just let you guys go ahead and I'll have fun.
Okay. I just have a few questions for the board, not for the board, for the for Robert and the city. I have a couple of questions, but the first one is, I know Mark kind of responded to, or Mr. Hyde responded to the public interest portion of the recommendation to grant the variance, or to what your guys' recommendation said, that you agreed that it met the criteria of the public interest. Could you speak to that a little bit, just to help me understand what public interest is supposed to mean in your guys' purview, and how that was potentially reconciled.
Wes, I'll attempt to do that. That was part of the previous staff report from the Planning Commission, which I wasn't involved in, but I will just say that there's public interest. It seems like public interest seems to be the possibility that there's a public interest in making sure that everybody has property rights that are recognized. And in this case, it seems like staff recognized that denying a property right could be in a case against public interest. Clearly, the Planning Commission did not see that in those terms. And I'm just not entirely sure if that's what staff's recommendation was on that part, but that's what I would say that the public interest in that element would be. The Planning Commission took a different view of the interpretation of public interest, and so really that's going to be up to you folks as the Board of Adjustment members tonight to.
Well, maybe it would help me just to understand. And actually, probably what I should say right here is me, Maria, and Andrew, and this is to all the people who are listening, public, whoever, we are just citizens of Provo trying to do our best here. We're trying to figure out what things look like. We're trying to act as the Board of Adjustment, which in a lot of ways is semi-judicial, meaning that we act almost according to the law of the criteria, and it's we try not to be as emotional as we do this. So this is just kind of, and that's more my approach. I'm trying not to be emotional about it, but I do think it's important to understand for me, as I'm still learning this process, what your interpretation from the city is, the public interest portion. What does that actually mean? When we're talking about if people are publicly interested in this, we've seen a lot of against, right? So what does public interest mean to the city, and how should we help us try and interpret it in I mean, I see you gave us two things, but what would the city suggest public interest should mean?
I can't answer that for you, Wes. Speaking on behalf of the city, the only thing that I could say that public interest is taking into account when we think of the public, we're thinking of the broad spectrum of the residents of Provo, and viewing this through the lens of what is best for the broad spectrum of the residents in Provo.
Okay, yeah, that actually helps.
May I say something, please?
Please go ahead, Maria.
For me, when I think of public interest, I've been in meetings before where there will be a lot of public comments for or against an item, and everybody is very passionate and cares deeply about that particular thing, and I respect their opinions, and I'm grateful they took time out of their busy lives to come and give us their input. But that doesn't constitute for me public interest. What I, in this particular case, what I'm looking at in public interest is how it affects, like you said, Robert, the general public, but more importantly, the people living right around this property, and how will our decision, the Planning Commission's decision, affect the people living right around this property. And regardless of how the people have come out and spoken to us, if they were all for it, if they were all against it, if it was split 50-50, it really doesn't matter to me. Again, I'm grateful, very grateful they take time out of their busy lives to come and let us know. And sometimes I learn something that I didn't know, and I'm always taking notes. But they're not what I base my decision on. I can only say that in this instance, I don't think that the Planning Commission made an error. As I've studied and I've read through this several times, and I've made a lot of notes. They're scribbling on all these pages. But it seems to boil down a lot to hardship. You know, is there a hardship that Mr. Hyde is going to experience that that other people in that right in that immediate area, that that his neighbors are able to enjoy, that he is not going to enjoy. And I made this note that there is a hardship, but that it was self-imposed by knowingly buying a property that is landlocked and lacking access. And so there is a hardship, but that one that was brought on by perhaps not doing due diligence and proper due diligence. And I think that by going against the decision of the Planning Council, that it would be going contrary to the public interest, because it would be disturbing the existing slopes and vegetation, which threaten the existing homes on both sides of the property and above and below it, creating a fire risk, creating risk of mudslides. And that to me is the public interest. So those are my thoughts.
Cool. Thanks, Maria. So my thoughts on this, a lot of people, and maybe this is my other question for the city, a lot of people were talking about the dangers of doing this. There's a lot of danger. And in my reading of this and a lot of the commentary made by the city and the engineers and everything, is there danger? And I'm just asking, are there dangers that everyone's talking about? Everyone's talking about fire and mudslides and earthquakes and lots of just dangerous things that will happen if they create this access route here. If we were to agree to the board's or the city's recommendation, is there what is the danger? What are the risks? You know, everyone's talking about these things. How realistic are these dangers? I mean, I'm sure a lot of people could, cut down a tree in their backyard, but that's their right, and it could potentially increase the mudslide chances or danger for fire hazard or whatever it is. But they have the right to cut that down. So I'm just wondering what dangers are being posed here.
Wes, if I can kind of speak to that and kind of add my own thought, and we can kind of continue this. And my thought is that any property that is within a residential zone, the default assumption should be that by some means that property should be able to be used for its residential purpose, and that it should be able to have a home, a dwelling, at least a single dwelling built upon it. I'm very sympathetic with that point, and I think that right should be guarded jealously. I think it's perhaps unfortunate, and the city can do as it will, that this has been left to sit in a residential zone to allow that this question could be risen in the first place. But as a public interest, I take the point that it is very much in the public interest that right be protected. However, it's also, and I think this is kind of my main point, in the public interest to supersede or override those rights in very limited circumstances, where instances perhaps of public safety or other kind of high-ranking perhaps environmental needs should be considered. And so my thought, at least as I'm sitting here so far, is to say that I haven't heard enough today to say that I'm willing to override that decision made by the Planning Commission, and that the public interest is well, there are conflicting interests. I think the protecting this land and existing homes probably is the higher of the two that ought to supersede. However, I am willing to have a conversation, at very least, about the possibility of, I know no one likes this word, but of considering a continuance to allow those more material evidence regarding safety to be presented, should other board members feel that would materially impact their decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested to hear what the city has to say about the safety hazards, based on all the commentary, before the continuance would be considered. I just want to hear if there is sufficient information on whether this is actually dangerous. I mean, a fire, for example, a fire clearing out that area, I don't see how that increases the chance of a fire, right? But that's just me, right? And everyone has opinions on what it potentially could happen, or mudslides or whatever. But what are the actual findings that the city and engineering have deemed? And I'd be interested in hearing if the city has any professional commentary on that.
I just remember Mr. Day and Mr. Pepperoni. Mr. Day was talking about the scrub oak that have been there so long, and that their roots are holding in the soil, that would have to be removed in order to put in this access road that has to be built before they can even go in to test the fault line to see how stable or unstable the fault area is, and that and then Mr. Pepperoni was saying that after they get that heavy equipment down in the gully and start digging and digging the trench and doing what all they have to do, that it can create some instability for the properties just above that, I believe on the east side, if I'm not mistaken.
Robert,
so,
do you have any insight on it though? Is there any other insight, Robert, that you could provide?
Sure. Let me just address it in this way, Wes. Excuse me. I would say that our code has specific standards that allow development within those regulations, right? And then in this case, there have been specific requirements that would need to be met in order to exceed those limitations. I would be very, very hesitant and reticent in this type of situation to say there are no safety concerns or there are safety concerns, because that analysis has not been done. And so that's something that would need additional data if it could be conclusive at all. I'll let David speak as well, but as far as saying yes, there are specific safety hazards or no, that's something I can't answer other than to say that's the reason we have a code with specific requirements. And if the development isn't allowable within those specific requirements, then you generally are getting into those areas where it's questionable. So, David, do you have any thoughts on that?
Just what has been stated before, our concern is the undermining of the slope on the east side. Very problematic, very costly to do anything that would be stable that would get down into there. Plus the permanent damage to the environment that's probably not repairable in the state that it's currently in. So really the danger, I guess, is loss of the natural hillside and the uncertainty of being able to stabilize that without putting the properties to the east at risk. And really it's just the uncertainty of that.
Okay, I appreciate that. I get the sense that Andrew, you and Maria are kind of on the deny train. My thoughts are this: is that being a semi-judicial committee, just going over the 5 criteria, I personally believe that it fulfills all of them. That allowing this is basically, if Provo City is saying, hey, here's a parcel of land that's an R110 zone, and this is the parcel of land, the right is that he should be able to build a home if it's buildable. That is his right. And Provo City granted that before it was even, by allowing this to even be a parcel. In my purview, before this 30% rule or anything came up, they created this R110 land and said, yes, you can parcel this off and this is a parcel. If Provo didn't have the intent to allow them to build there, they should have left it in the possession of whoever was on the street and already had a home on it, and not parcel it off. Because they parcel it off, they're saying a house could be built here. And the parcel in my came to effect way before we had some of these rules. And so his doing his diligence, he's coming to the Board of Adjustment because he's saying Provo City made this into a parcel. And now it is unreasonable hardship because I cannot build a house without doing this, without getting this variance of getting into this access. Now, I love land, I love tree, and I love safety. I don't know about the safety situation. That's my only question.
Do we still have Wes?
Hello? Hey, sorry. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, go ahead. You were talking about your love of land.
Basically, I'm just saying that I love land. I love all this stuff, but really, it's his property. He could go in with a chainsaw tomorrow and chop down the coolest tree out there. I don't think there's any law against him cutting down his own tree, right? What people are concerned about is destroying the views, destroying the beauty of the situation, and how that would impact their situation where they've built in a nice neighborhood that maybe won't be as nice with some of the trees, and maybe there's some safety concern. That's the only question mark maybe for me, but that's not gonna, for us, having them do an excavation and checking it out, there will be some damages to the land for sure. But is that enough damage where all of the trees aren't going to be destroyed, all of the situation, all the shrubbery is not going to be taken out, and will it be significant enough where it's going to endanger people around them or not? And I'm not convinced that it's going to endanger people around them. And as much as I want the public and everyone to understand that, yeah, you know, I hear you. Like, this is a tough situation. But according to the law, which is currently there's a law and a standard, and if he meets the criteria to go beyond that criteria of what is the law, then we should grant it. Now, you guys may interpret it differently or whatever, but I tend to look through the staff report and agree with why the variance should be granted. It meets the 5 criteria. It doesn't meet, like, people don't love it. I don't necessarily even love it personally, but it kind of meets the 5 criteria. And that's what we're here to discuss. And so that's where I'm at. I'm not like 110%. This is, yeah, follow the staff's report or recommendation, but I'm kind of personally. Now you two can vote against it, and I'm more sympathetic for the city and of the people who live around there and all this. Like, I own a home in Provo, and if somebody built a monstrosity next to my home, I would be very angry, right? But it's their right to do that. And if they drive fast cars and do all this stuff and my kids are in danger, I would be very angry, but I can't do much about that because it's in his purview to have a fast car and a loud machine and a big home, right? And that's really what we're discussing here. It's not about what we feel as much. It's more about what is laid out.
Well, I do and like I said at the beginning of my comment, I do, feel, that is, there needs to be a pretty significant case to override or limit any of that kind of, right to use and develop property, especially when it's, zoned, appropriately. And that seems to be the kind of, if not explicit, but implicit, intention of the city. And I think that's, well, I guess I'm not sure that I'm completely convinced that, and this is kind of one of the things you talked about, us kind of being kind of that, that unprofessional kind of, citizen body. That in some ways, that semi-judicial piece. I mean, there's the other half of the semi, which is not judicial, which is, does this make sense? Does, according to kind of, us, regular folk trying to interpret these 5, criteria, does it make sense? And to add kind of a certain kind of, human review, and I, I think given the strong, I don't want to, dismiss, I mean, to me, and it's probably not necessary this be the case, but to me, when, my peers give such a, resounding and clear statement, I don't want to overturn that without, very strong reasons. And I don't, there are very good reasons. I don't know if it tips the scale for me. Maria, where are you sitting right now?
I was just reviewing the, well, first of all, our goal for tonight. We have to consider whether the Planning Commission erred in the decision to deny the requested variance. And so I was looking over their reasons, reading them over again. I should have them memorized. I've read them over so many times. But Andrew, I agree with what you just said, that, this was a 7-0 vote. And I know from reading over many reports in the past that these aren't even all of the reasons that were probably listed, but these are just the highlighted ones. But I think that these, Dave Anderson and Daniel Gonzalez, Allie Jones, Lisa Jensen, Brian Henry, these are all sound and viable reasons in my mind for denying this variance request. And if this was a 5-3 decision or 4-3 decision, perhaps I could persuade myself to, say, yeah, maybe they made an error, but I just can't in this case. I think that they made the right decision. I cannot say that I think they made an error, and I think that their reasons that are listed here are very sound.
Well, maybe
Yeah,
my last. Go ahead, Wes.
Oh, I was just going to say my last point was going to be basically in our case, we can go with kind of what the public says. I would say that the Planning Commission, having been at Planning Commission meetings and City Council meetings, it is often the case that people vote on the vast majority of what the people want. And so having heard not a single one besides Mr. Hyde saying this is a good idea, I would doubt that the planning commission would ever go forward with that in a situation where they're like, there's too many people that don't like this, and that's why they did
No,
it. And
you'd
so,
be wrong. You'd be wrong.
well, I don't know. We've seen different situations, but I'm just saying that I think that that's generally where a lot of push and pull comes from, is the public interest. And so anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm not 100% convinced the safety of the situation is viable, but I think that, and the public interest is still a question for me. And that's the only thing on the thing that I would probably disagree with, is that public interest is affected by this. So, you guys could probably make a motion and
well, maybe
we can move on.
Maybe I'll go ahead and say this. The only thing that I think we haven't really talked about as a board, and maybe this is an irrelevant point to add, but of course, the fact that this is a variance means that we are overturning something that was already in place. And I'm persuaded to leave that in place, and to make a motion that we, as a board, uphold the decision made by the Planning Commission, and to deny the request for variance based on negative impact on public interest. And I would need a second or an amendment.
I'm just second. Trying to get to the. What about possibly adding that, let's see, I'm just winging off the top of my head.
Take your time, you're fine.
See. Okay, what did you say again, Andrew? I'm sorry. How did you say it?
To summarize, it was to uphold the Planning Commission's decision, deny the variance, and our findings based on that it would be deleterious to the public interest to decide otherwise.
I'll second it. I'll just second it because I actually agree that that's the sticking point for me when it comes down to it. It's not in favor of public interest.
So we'll go ahead and, well, I guess, Maria, I still want to give you the opportunity if you wanted to add something there. I don't want to jump.
I was just wondering if we wanted to add anything about hardship, but I'm fine with just leaving it at that.
Let's go ahead and have a vote then as is. We will vote on the motion that the Board of Adjustment moves to uphold. Sorry, I move, I guess. Andrew Rennick moved to uphold the decision of the Provo Planning Commission and deny the request for variance, finding that to overturn it would be contrary to the public interest. And so, Andrew Rennick, I vote aye.
Aye.
Wes Marriott, aye. And I also just want to say, Mark, even though we've all voted against this, you can appeal to the district, and you can allow that, you can do whatever you want in the next steps on this, if you disagree with this
May I say what we always say, which is we are very grateful to be a part of a civic process like this. We are grateful to be a part of the the democratic framework of the city, and to be able to participate in this process, and very much very grateful to all of you who have made the sacrifices to be part of this process today. If there's no other nothing else, I think we will close the meeting.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Good night.
Take care.